So, apologies.
I've received none, Chairman.
Thank you. Two is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of July as attached. I go to page 7. I'll just go down through the pages and then if you've got anything to raise, please let speak up. Page 7, 8, and 9. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. I have to say they're very thorough and detailed minutes.
Chair, sorry, I just looked and because I just checked my diary, I gave my apologies, but we don't seem to be recorded.
Okay. I think I remember being.
No, I wasn't at the meeting, but I did give my apologies. I gave my apologies.
Okay. Proposal to accept the meeting. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, thank you.
Chair, sorry, can I abstain, please? And I do query that, and I've just checked now, I did give my apologies when they're on, and that's already there. I'd like to abstain because I wasn't at the meeting. Thank you.
You wonder what I'm doing? The screen disappears. So I've got it. 3 items brought forward, which in the opinion of the chair should be considered by the meeting as a matter of urgency. I have none. Declarations of interest.
I've received none, Chairman.
Thank you. And 5 to 3 between part A and part B is just part A. Numbers. So therefore, we go over to 6. Jeremy is going to give us a presentation and some conclusion.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Committee. I'd like to run through a brief presentation on coastal deprivation, to talk about the situation nationally, talk about the situation that exists within our community, and to talk about the measures, the interventions the council is putting in place to hopefully address that situation, and to invite you to give some consideration as regards the adequacy of those interventions. And I have one additional recommendation that I would wish to put forward for your consideration this morning. So if you're content, Chair, I'll run through my presentation.
Very much.
So last year, Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, a guy who's been made quite famous through his presentations with Boris during the COVID pandemic, produced his annual report. And his annual report last year majored on coastal community deprivation. Kelly has agreed to kindly circulate the presentation after the meeting, and if you're interested, I've provided the web link to the report, Chris Whitty's report. In Chris Whitty's report, there is a remarkable similarity of coastal deprivation in coastal communities right across the country. The characteristics identified in his report, shown graphically and numerically, are remarkably similar. And they present an unfortunate situation that is not an acceptable one. And Chris Whitty's report makes mention of the fact that if this situation exists now, then there's with absolute effort, we should be seeking to remedy this situation, because this has the potential to get worse, not better. So the characteristics of coastal communities, the deprivation that's observed at a national level are issues around population health. And the evidence is clear that there is a greater burden of disease, that the communities on general are less well. Lower levels of life expectancy, lower levels of healthy life expectancy, lower levels of disability-free life expectancy. Coastal communities are associated with higher levels of deprivation. There are characteristics of migration that are common to coastal communities, and that migration is often associated with the availability of relatively cheap private rented accommodation, shared accommodation, houses of multiple occupation, that type of accommodation, and also maybe of late a proliferation of supported accommodation. So where organisations are providing accommodation to individuals that are recovering from drug addiction, from mental health type issues. There is an unfortunate trend as regards a relative deficiency in health services. So when we look at ratios of people working in primary care and in care, there is an inequality. The economic prosperity of coastal communities generally is less, unemployment is higher, educational standards are lower, and there are wider issues associated with housing, particularly around the characteristics of poor quality shared accommodation. It all sounds a little bit grim. That's a situation on a national level. And then I thought, well, that's fine, but what does it mean? Let's have a look at the situation a little bit closer to home. To what extent are some of these things mirrored within our own community? So it's really interesting, and there's a link to a study that was carried out in 2016, not a hideous long time ago, that looked at health needs assessment of coastal practice in Ilfracombe. It's a really interesting read, the extent to which it highlights issues around the characteristics of the health status of that population, and issues around specific groups of people that live within that practice area. So this is an example of our community mirroring some of the national trends. This is data from Public Health that's recently presented to a One Northern Devon meeting. You can see the highest difference in life expectancy in Northern Devon. It's Ilfracombe to Monkley, the highest healthy life expectancy difference, Ilfracombe to Croydon. So there's some of the stark inequalities identified in the national report are particularly pertinent and particularly relevant for us when we look at our responsibilities for our own population. So this is interesting in relation to supported accommodation. So I spoke to you about those. There can be a trend of a migration of a population to certain coastal communities associated with the availability of the accommodation that exists within those communities. So in Ilfracombe and places like, to a lesser extent, parts of Barnstaple, you see a migration of people to certain communities because of the availability of relatively cheap, affordable accommodation, and that tends to be more poor quality HMO type accommodation. But what you've also seen in recent times is the providers of supportive accommodation providing looking at opportunities to buy property in areas that are relatively cheap. So that, you know, it was quite staggering for me to see that there are, and that's not 69 people, that's 69 establishments. So these would often be quite large houses in multiple occupation, where you have providers of supportive accommodation for people that are recovering from alcohol dependency, young people's accommodation, learning disabilities, mental health. And these providers are using a provision that's allowed for in housing benefit, where they can provide or charge higher rent levels that are not capped by housing benefit, on the basis of them being able to provide additional, for them, for there being a need to provide additional care to the people living in that accommodation. But when you have such a concentration of supportive accommodation of this type within a relatively small community, in addition to other forms of accommodation that I've mentioned, so the proliferation of shared housing, other kind of care establishments, nursing homes, you can see that this then has the potential to change the social mix and the characteristics of that community, and that then contributes to some of the data and the numbers that I've previously shared with you. So that's the sort of doom and gloom side of things. Coastal communities are national challenges. Sadly, the national challenges are really relevant and pertinent for us within our community. So the Chris Whitty's report says, don't despair, there are things that can be done. And the principal thing that can be done to address inequalities and deprivation is to increase economic prosperity. And there's a lot of science around connecting things within the health system and a whole host of other types of interventions that have a positive impact, but they might have a positive impact on a relatively small part of the population, people that are maybe at high risk. And I don't decry at all those interventions, but our responsibility is to try and affect change at a population level, at a community level. And the most fundamental thing that we can do, and the principal recommendation identified within Chris Whitty's report, is to increase the economic prosperity of our community. There are some people that say in public health, if you wish to get rid of health inequalities, there are only two things that you need to do: increase wealth and increase education, and everything else looks after itself. And sometimes there is a danger for me that people within the system seek to over-design stuff, and there almost becomes an industry associated with towns and communities that have got deprivation, where the fundamental solution is around increasing economic prosperity, improving standards of education. So when I look at Chris Whitty's recommendations, I get some level of assurance of the actions that this council's taking already in light of those recommendations. So the council has a number of priority programmes of action, and we have a member of SNT that has leadership of a programme of action for our community, which is all about economic regeneration and promoting economic growth. Sarah Jane McKenzie leaves a massive programme of 13, 14 plus programmes of work, which are all about increasing the economic prosperity of our community. More specific to Ilfracombe, we're collaborating with Devon County Council in the preparation of an urban renewal scheme, an action plan, again to promote economic growth, prosperity within our community. We have other interventions like the water sports centre. We have other interventions around our recent adoption of our coastal, our strategies for culture, for Ilfracombe and Barnstaple, that all around giving people opportunity within our community and have the potential to support this hugely important area where we can positively intervene, maybe much greater than people in health service and that type of thing. There are solutions here that are much more within our gift, I think, to remedy some of these situations. There was a recommendation also in the report around planning for the future, understanding that there are existing deficits in the workforces, particularly in health and social care. And we have elected to review our local plan because we want to put in policies and strategies that are commensurate to the needs of our community moving forward. We've convened a new entity, North Devon Futures, where we're seeking to collaborate with our partners to properly plan for the future of our community. There's a recommendation in the report around better collaboration across the system. Chris Whitty's looking specifically at health, social care, local government, voluntary sector, and we are collaborating through One Northern Devon to look at how we can look at system improvements to reduce health inequalities. So positive work, but I don't think, if I'm honest, 3 has got the potential of 1 in making a difference to our community. And then we've got programs of work around housing. We've said that we're going to look at how we inspect our shared accommodation, provide better ancillary support to tenants that are living in that accommodation. We're going to look at opportunities, how we can maximise the benefits that we can provide to our community through energy efficiency schemes. We've made representation to government around their deficiencies in the inadequacy of our ability to regulate holiday lets, an issue that you will see that's been picked up by Councillor Wilkinson in the paper that's previously been circulated to you. I think that's all really positive stuff. We're now looking at, now we have better knowledge of issues around the prevalence of supported housing in places like Ilfracombe. We're looking at how we might intervene to manage and to regulate that where we think it is appropriate. There's a private members bill that we're keeping an eye on, looking again at supported accommodation. And then government very recently has launched a massive consultation paper around looking at a new regulatory regime for private rented sector housing. And it's really important for us to contribute to that consultation because those issues for us, particularly in relation to the prevalence of shared housing, are really relevant within our community. That's in my presentation. There was one further recommendation beyond the information recommendations highlighted by Chris Whitty. And we are, as officers, obviously conscious of the responsibilities that Councillor Wilkinson has for coastal communities, his portfolio of responsibilities. And we are mindful that as officers that sometimes we can all beaver away in our particular strands of work. And we were wondering whether your committee would think it would be appropriate for us to put forward a representation that we bring people together with Councillor Wilkinson and an appropriate frequency, just to make sure organisationally we're optimising our efficiency in the manner in which we're seeking to address coastal deprivation issues within our community. So that would be my ask of your committee, and for your committee also to take a view on the adequacy of the kind of interventions that we are currently putting in place to try and kind of remedy this situation, which is quite serious and has the potential to get worse as the cost of living crisis then bites during the course of the winter. That's my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to have a drink then.
Kind of very informative. Members?
Thousands of questions.
Sorry?
Thousands of questions.
Well, if you'd like to start off.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
A couple of them was, one was going back, right back to the beginning where you were talking about the availability of cheap accommodation, and that's one of the things that attracts the migration of people or people into places like Ilfracombe. Has that seen any change since the great move from the southeast to Ilfracombe and other areas? So are people coming in and landlords selling up to people who want to actually live there and transform places into huge? That's question one. Is there any change?
So I think there are two types of migration. There's migration into our community from outside of our community, and then there's a migration of people within our community to certain places within our existing district. And what we see in the centre of Barnstaple and the centre of Ilfracombe, because of the availability of the accommodation, and it is the relative affordability of it. I'm not saying it is necessarily affordable in today's market, but the relative affordability of it. There is still a level of migration of people to those communities, and there is evidence, anecdotal evidence, to suggest that people within the market are identifying the opportunities to buy property and to convert property into shared housing to encourage more people then to move into some of those communities. So I'm aware of one organisation that is quite active now in buying larger properties, converting them into houses of multiple occupation in our coastal community. So that within district migration is absolutely still happening. And there is then, up until recently, certainly quite a significant of immigration to North Devon, particularly when I look at evidence of who's buying new properties on housing estates. And a significant percentage of those properties are being purchased by people out of district.
So I was thinking that those people that are buying outside of district, that are only buying up then in Ilfracombe, that are, instead of converting them into HMOs, are they convert them into luxury flats? Is there any movement like that? So does that help the Ilfracombe community? Is it happening? Does it help it? Does it actually hinder it because the HMOs are not there, or is there a loss?
Yeah, so of late there has been a loss of rented accommodation as people have sought to technical term now rented accommodation into Airbnb type accommodation. So we have seen a significant loss of rented accommodation. And that is particularly challenging to us in relation to some of our statutory housing duties, where we're seeking to provide or identify alternative sources of accommodation for people that present to us as homeless, or discharge our duty for a homeless person into a suitable alternative private rented accommodation. And it is really challenging for us to source at this time in the current market to source that accommodation. And so housing is really complex because there are, I make a presentation to you today telling you around the social consequences caused by a proliferation of shared housing in the centre of Barnstaple and the centre of Ilfracombe. At the same time, when I've got responsibility for a service area that needs a level of accommodation to make sure we can discharge our statutory duties, it really is a challenging situation. My conclusion is that there is nothing inherently wrong with shared housing as long as that shared housing is affordable to standard and it's properly managed. And those are the challenges that we face here. And I think those are those challenges exist also in relation to maybe some of the operation of the supportive accommodation that we see in every.
No, just I'll stay with one more rather than this at the moment.
It's my fault, but it's Catherine Mackey speaking.
No, that's okay. Economic prosperity, that slide that we had on no, it was about my imagination, was it quite early on? It's quite early on. Yeah.
So that's the characteristics of the.
No, I think you were saying about Sarah Jane's responsibilities.
So so corporately we have a number of priority programs of action.
Yeah.
I ran a programme about.
Yeah, the question was, you'd got up there, it was something about economic prosperity. And I was thinking, yes, I totally agree. We need to focus on that in order to, to boost the areas, but it never said anything about like a diverse economic prosperity or outlook. Because in our heads, I think most of the time when we're thinking of boosting the economy in coastal areas, unfortunately, we're still honing in on the tourism aspect. And I didn't know, it was just said economic, and I didn't know how diverse the economic programs were within our coastal communities. I'll leave my questions at that.
So Sarah Jane's programme is diverse, and it's really interesting when I look at places like Ilfracombe and I look at the key employers in Ilfracombe, and we are moving away where there is maybe less reliance on tourism. So there's some very big and very significant employers that exist that benefit from people working in North Devon and particularly Ilfracombe. And what's absolutely critical for the council is we need to see those organisations like PAL and PDK expand and prosper, because they are providing lots of jobs and well-paid jobs has a massive impact then on the wider economic prosperity of our community. And it's a real concern to us when those organisations are reporting to us workforce challenges around their ability to bring people to North Devon. And that's why we have a programme of action around trying to expand housing opportunities to alleviate some of these kind of workforce challenges, workforce deficits that exist not only in the public service but increasingly in the private sector businesses.
Councillor Walker? And then, sorry, I'll talk about
It may put his hand up.
So the trouble is, now if I sit like that, more sensible, all right, okay. So we'll let the vote.
Yeah.
The thing that concerns me about the whole of North Devon, including especially in the coast areas, is the lack of health workers, the lack of, so the particularly in social care. Is there anything that we can do that would encourage be able to support the higher wages here, because that's the problem, is if you're being paid £9.50 an hour to do a job in a care home or something like that, it's hard work for that level of wage. Is there anything that's plans to be done about encouraging people into the care sector, which would then have a knock-on benefit to the health sector?
So in the Chief Medical Officer's report, there are other recommendations that are not so relevant for us. And there are recommendations about action to be taken around workforce deficit, inequality of provision in health and social care. But I don't think necessarily that's within the remit of this council to comment on that. But I think that is a valid representation and a valid challenge that this council could make then to commissioners within health and social care to say, well, we're aware of the inequalities, the levels of deprivation within our community. Could you give us an understanding of the provision of healthcare, social care within North Devon? Understand the extent to, we may be pleasantly surprised. There may not be those deficits and those challenges identified on a national basis, but if they are evidenced, then rightly you could be asking then commissioners in health and social care the action that they're taking to remedy those. That's not something within our gift, but it's something that certainly we can make representation and explore.
No, Ray put his hand up.
No, come here, Don. You'd be the last.
Well, what I was going to ask is, when you say coastal communities, how far back into the hinterland are you considering a coastal community? Because surely the whole of North Devon has been affected by this. I mean, especially on housing issue, as you know, small villages. I mean, within my ward, I've got people that have been evicted from their cottages. They've been living there over 20 years. They've been evicted, turning to holiday accommodation. It's across them, and that's for the attraction of the rural coast area, bringing them in. How far back out of the hinterland are we looking to remedy this?
The reality is that it's the whole shooting match in North Devon. It isn't just the strip that borders the sea. This is impacting, maybe not in equal measure, but these are relevant issues for all of our community. I can use some examples of issues in African because maybe they're the easiest and the most stark things for me to highlight. But the issues are as you rightly highlight, are relevant across our entire community. And when you look at the Chief Medical Officer's report, North Devon Council's administrative area is highlighted en bloc. It's not subdivided into the coastal bit. It is a single entity.
Chair, if I can just add, Chair, the strategy and resources meeting on Monday considered a call for evidence from government around second homes, number of holiday lets in the area as well, as you know, because you were at the meeting. So this council has made representation and responded back to that call for evidence from government, which sets out a number of questions and answers. So members may want to have a look at that paper. The Chief Executive's drafted the response. That sets out a number of parishes where the number of second homes and holiday lets is considerably high. Some were almost near as 50% in terms of the number of properties in those parishes.
It was the 10% factor.
It went down to around 10% at Coombe Martin, but there were probably a good 20 parishes where we've got properties over 10% that have got second homes and holiday lets. So this council is making representation back to government and that call for evidence because we are one of the most affected areas in the country. That will obviously go back to government with other responses, and we await to see what action is taken by government to try and mitigate that in health.
Just one point, at that meeting, Councillor Elizabeth Spear pointed out that although not 10% in just because the population is much bigger, it is still an issue there. Because other places are literally running out of space, and I won't mention streets in this, but it is even since the last district council elections, there'll be one street without space with like the last 30% of the people living there, and it's ongoing. So we, as some of these areas get sucked down harder than that, hollowing down, it does seem to be spreading. I'll stop that. Nothing I've said to that.
No, certainly not.
Okay.
Just wanted to know what was the lunch at tonight.
Councillor,
I never noticed. That's up in the address, but here you go. One thing that's always bothered me, don't get me wrong, some of these Airbnbs are okay. You know, people could have somewhere to stay when they come down to and bring the economy a bit up in our coastal areas in the summer. But are there, what's worried me, because I have seen some when we've gone to a couple of places elsewhere, is there ever any checks done on guest houses, Airbnbs, to make sure their standard is fit enough for people to stay in? And is there something that can be done to make sure that this is something that can be put in place? Because anyone can turn their place into an Airbnb, but it's what's, you don't know what standard you're going to get until you turn up.
It's a really good point. And it's one of the areas that Chief Exec has challenged government on the deficiency of the regulatory provisions in relation to Airbnb. There are certain businesses that are not really covered by any regulatory regime. That's a reality of it. And that doesn't feel right, and it doesn't feel fair in the context of other people that may be providing a guest house type arrangement where they are subject to fire inspections and other things. So I think government needs to make sure that there is a level playing field for businesses that are basically providing the same type of service.
So perhaps we should be lobbying government then to get the law changed a bit, that kind of the same regime as guest house.
And that's the representation the Chief Exec made that John referred to.
Yes, there were 6 options that government asked us to respond to in terms of what we consider the most appropriate form of response to the short-term letting market. So one was do nothing, one was around providing more information to the sector. The one that the Chief Executive proposed and what was recommended at the Deputy meeting on Monday was to develop a licensing scheme with physical checks of the premises. So that puts a regulatory onus then on those premises to have that regulatory regime put in place so that those checks are done. It also recognises then that they are operating as a business, and then you would hope that then they would fall into the taxation system in terms of business rates and paying the appropriate taxation to the authorities as well running the business.
Thank you. Is it also something that we could actually bring to full council that we actually do get something done?
Yes, I mean, obviously the minutes from the strategy and resources meeting on Monday, which includes that response to that call for evidence, will go to full council. So that is obviously cited there.
Yeah.
If you want to see the full report, then by all means have a look at the agenda papers from Monday and the documented answers to all the questions that were put forward are part of those agenda papers.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you very much.
Can I just say, sorry, it's fine. Let's just say.
We'll get your chance, Councillor.
I think it is of the question that the government are already working on this for some time. you know, they're not ignoring the Airbnb, looking at the legislation, they're looking at second homes and everything. This has already been going on for some time. Like I say, it's gone out to consultation. Work has already been done, so you know, we make representations, each council is doing it, but the government are fully aware of it and they're working on it. And the question I was going to ask was, you say about increasing the economy of the area. How is that going to help the residents of HMOs in general? Because as you say, their health issues and things, are they the sort of people that are going to be going out and getting the big jobs and things? Is that, that's, I mean, Ilfracombe, ever since I can remember, has been known for an area where that sort of HMOs and that sort of thing has been in, you know, I've been here all my life and Ilfracombe has been famous for it, you know, and it needs lifting back to its glory Victorian days, isn't it?
Promoting the economic prosperity of the community is by far and away the most effective way of addressing deprivation. And that works at a population level, at a community level. There are some people whose circumstances are complex, where it is appropriate for us to look at plans and interventions that are specific to that individual. And that's why in our proposals, we're looking at the early provision of support to people that are in shared accommodation before they present to us, to see if we can act upstream to give them better opportunities to avoid crisis situations moving forward. So from a public health perspective, to address inequalities, we need to work at a population level, but also then have compassionate and targeted approaches for a smaller population of people whose issues are a little bit more tricky, a bit more complex. And that's what we're trying to do. That's right and that's ethical. For us to change indices around coastal deprivation, we need to work at a population level. So a very effective intervention to help an individual won't have a wider benefit to the community. And so the challenge for us in our work is to make sure that we, in a way, sometimes we can be drawn to put too much focus on high risk strategies, to focus on smaller groups of people within a population because our needs are more acute than others. In our community leadership responsibility, we need to be working to the benefit of our community, to our population, and it's absolutely legitimate and right that we try these programs that have an impact across the board. So it's a combination of the two. I sometimes get challenged by my officers as regards my promotion of public health approaches, interventions at a community level, at a population level, because someone would say, well, what about the needs of this individual person? And I get it, but you cannot, in our responsibilities, exclusively focus on people that are of the highest need to the detriment of approaches that look at the wider population. It has a danger of disenfranchising people, wider people in the population if we do that.
Councillor Jenkins, 1, 2, 3, you've got to.
That's right.
It's a very polite committee as well.
It is.
Who would come again?
Right, shall I start? I have a couple of questions, actually. One is about medical support. Clearly, in coastal communities, there's likely to be a higher load, personal load, because of the influx of holiday makers and the like, the Airbnb tenants, for example. How is that managed within the medical community to get the balance right between the higher load during the summer and the lower load in the winter?
So I think that's a really valid question. The commissioners in health build in some level of contingency, but I think that would be a question that it would be appropriate to make a direct representation to senior health commissioners. Because that is, particularly relevant for us when the evidence suggests that our population has a higher burden of disease and lower levels of life expectancy. So it would be quite in order to see then a commensurate level of health and social care provision relative to the needs of our population. That would be disappointing if that doesn't exist.
I mean, do we know, for example, that the age demographic of holidaymakers is significantly different I mean,
We have
clearly you'll have kids with parents and so on, but a significant number of elderly people will also be taking holidays in those resorts that they're familiar with.
So I have seen evidence of the increase in acute NHS demand in the summer months. But again, I think it would be appropriate for us to make direct representation to people in health to understand the situation directly from them.
Okay, and the next one comes, questions about the economic benefits of people who come to Airbnb accommodation. My experience, and I speak about this personally, not about Airbnb, but taking holidays when you've got kids in tow, the first thing you do is hit the supermarkets because you're going to do your own cooking and so on in that accommodation. So the amount of money that gets back into the community generally is probably less than we first imagined, looking at the amount that they will actually be spending. It goes to the supermarkets, for example, rather than to business in general.
I think that's a valid representation. I don't have any data specifically to support that, but I would imagine that to be the case. And I think that, again, was one of the reasons why the council felt it appropriate to make such a robust representation to the government's consultation on the regulation of holiday lets.
And what regulation is there on holiday lets that will control it or limit it, control it in terms of quality or limit it in terms of numbers, so that the local population can get accommodation?
So at this time, there is the ability for people that are letting accommodation as private rented accommodation. I'll use the word flip again, because I can't think of a better word, to change the use into a holiday let. There is no planning controls, not considered to be a material change of use.
Sorry, are you saying that it can't be controlled by planning?
It cannot be changed. It's allowable by the current planning regime. So people that have sought to capitalise in more people taking holiday in the UK have not breached planning. And we've had a detailed look at some particular cases to see whether there is anything associated with those particular cases that would enable us to say, look, no, this is a material change of use. And senior planners have looked at these cases and have concluded in every situation that there was no breach of planning rules. So it is a deficiency of the current system that we've made representation.
My last question really is to understand, you said that there's a significant similarity in coastal areas is very close, but a significant difference between the coastal areas and other areas in the country. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so the characteristics of coastal deprivation identified in Chris Whitty's report are common to each of the are common to many of the coastal areas.
Okay.
So there's commonality to coastal areas. And what we see then is many of the issues identified in Chris Whitty's report are mirrored within our own community. And some of those things are quite a start level. When, for example, the disparity in life expectancy, that should not really be existing in 2022.
So if you were to segment demographies, people, ages, backgrounds, trades or income levels, if you took similar proportions in both coastal communities and other communities, if you were to segment them, would they, within those small sections of the community, be similar, or are they still significantly different?
So the demographies of coastal communities are often similar. So, and the health status of different groups of people within our communities are similar to other coastal areas. So when we
Coastal areas.
So when we look at so older people, by way of example, fare less well in coastal communities than they would in non-coastal areas.
So are we now talking about income, or are we talking about general health or living conditions?
We're talking about their general well-being, and a lot of that is associated with wealth. Wealth and health are inextricably linked. So people, sorry to interrupt, but there has been a tendency of people migrating to North Devon who end up in a situation where they are asset rich but cash poor. And then there are challenges then around their ability to maintain their property, and then wider issues around their well-being associated with the fact that they're asset rich and becoming cash poor.
And can I just say exactly what you said, but since they're often retired people, when one of the parties, as a space speaking, and one of the partners dies, then male or female, particularly males, it's difficult to get out of themselves. You get problems with that as well, don't you?
Yeah.
Which affects them.
Yeah. Yeah. In different.
And I'm going to ask.
So
nothing that.
Relative group, different populations of our community fare less well in comparison to non-coastal areas, whether they be older people, young people. It is a characteristic of that.
I wonder how far you have to drill down on that to find out what the differences are caused by it. And I can imagine, for example, that people who are living in a town will have the mentality of people who live in a town, earn a living over the years and had to start off with us. People in the rural communities are less well off during their lifetime, but their pension is likely to be similar.
I would contend that the inequalities and the principal cause of the deprivation, as evidenced by Chris Whitty's primary recommendation about increasing economic prosperity, it is principally around wealth.
Yeah, but as you said, they can be asset rich, but fiscally. And that's the bit that matters on a day-to-day basis. And that will be determined by, for example, their pension. And state pension is going to be the same across the country, largely. It's difficult for me to see why there should be that big disparity unless there is another element that I haven't latched onto yet.
I think it would be interesting to have a more detailed scrutiny of Chris Whitty's report, and also the health needs assessment report for Coombe Coastal GP practice. I'm more than happy to have a one-to-one conversation, because it really is quite interesting. There's some quite interesting science associated with it, but it clearly is a situation that is not socially acceptable, and for us, we need to do
So
something.
do you have the means to take that forward, just to, speaking to other people, gather that sort of information or not?
I would be more than happy to have a conversation away from a formal meeting with anyone that has a specific interest in the data, in the numbers, because it is, I think the more people that have knowledge of the situation and are driven to make a difference, that will be to the benefit of our wider community.
Councillor Knapp.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was interesting. Interesting person. On your presentation, at the moment, we've got the lovely Orion right there. I don't know whether you get the presentation at the last couple of slides where you're saying what we are doing or in process of doing, so we get to know.
Shall I drive?
Mhm.
So I'm allowed the bleeper at work, but not at home.
If not, I think I can. No, not on
I
that.
think you clicked on the link, I think.
Yeah, you clicked on the link instead. Yeah, okay, keep going.
Lower down, down. In the actual slide, that's it. Somewhere like that's it.
Yeah, keep going. No, again. Whoa. Well, that's it. Introduction. Can you expand on the introduction policies to regulate migration to places like Ilfracombe? So,
when I look at, yeah, happy to give some further clarification to that point. So when I look at, and this is information that is, if I'm honest, come to light, is the part of my research to coming to your committee today. I wasn't shocked, but I was surprised by the concentration of exempt supported accommodation in those 70 units of accommodation. Many of those will be large shared HMOs, and I have a suspicion that corporately we may not have full knowledge of all of those businesses, and I think there's a piece of work that we will undertake now to look at standards of management, standards of condition in those communities. And there's also a conversation that I need to have with my planning colleagues as regards whether there are other policies that we should have that would then maybe limit the further proliferation of that type of accommodation within a specific area.
okay, it's just not how I kind of read that. I thought regulate migration was to stop migration, not to regulate what was there.
Well, potentially it's twofold, isn't it? So it could be improving standards of the existing, but limiting the proliferation of additional units. So I think it's both.
So I'd just say at the end there that with the local plan, it does need to be under review all the time to keep. I think moves are afoot, aren't there, to get it into such a place where we can add to it rather than have this is adopted, that's it for 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever, it needs to be, a work in progress all the time.
Our local plan is a major policy document that will have a transformational impact on these issues, and it's really important that we get it right. And it's really important that organisationally we know the relevance of our work to other agendas. So the link between our economic strands and health. Probably sometimes we don't necessarily always recognise these things.
Members, John has to go to another meeting, I'm afraid. Obviously, we've got to come back to this. I don't know whether you, Jeremy, have to also leave. The way John presents the finance is, superb. The way. I'm sorry, but opposite members, we sorted out after you finished, John.
That's it. I didn't know whether you wanted any recommendations from your investigate. I need to leave at 11:15 for the meeting. That's your chair. So I was just
That's right.
conscious that we've got my next report. I didn't know whether you
John,
wanted
don't
to.
let them distract you.
No, I think we have included, I think.
Got anything in terms of recommendations you think you want to?
There was the recommendation that Jeremy requested for the
Yeah.
working group, which we didn't really have a decision taken on, so.
And potentially that representation to commissioners in health and social care to understand the services that are being commissioned here relative to the population health status of our community, to either get reassurance that we've got a higher provision because we've got a higher burden of disease. And if we have less provision commensurate to needs, what are they going to do to remedy it? That would be a reasonable thing to say.
With your permission, may I propose executive leave?
That's it.
Second, more than one, all in favor, show please, unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I find it very interesting. Because I think you brought the bicycle, but I lived for quite a long time ago, brought it there. It clicked and it used it.
No, thank you for the opportunity of presenting.
Yeah, very interesting, very depth. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, members, to rush you. And obviously, it's such an interesting and important topic that Jeremy was talking about. Obviously, I was conscious that I didn't want to have to jump out before the finance report. And so, members, your next item is the Q1 performance report, which starts on page 17 of your agendas. The forecast budget surplus at Q1 we're reporting is a small budget surplus of £3,000. And the variances making up that small surplus is shown in your appendix A on page 25. I'll just run through some of the key headlines. Temporary accommodation is still under additional cost pressures and continues to increase. We're currently forecasting £120,000 adverse variance on the temporary accommodation budget. That is being mitigated by contribution from the Homelessness Earmark Reserve in the current year. The largest variance in your appendix A figures is the forecast £804,000 for the potential National Pay Award. That's over and above the inflation increase of £280,000 that had already been built into the base budget. And the pay award is based on 1,925 all full-time equivalent staff that have been put forward by the national employers to the unions and is currently out for consultation with the union members. But that hasn't been finalised and obviously is still waiting to be decided upon as to whether that will be accepted or not. If it's accepted, then the figures will be in line with the forecast in your report. If it's not accepted, then obviously it will go back out for further conversation between national employers and the unions. Other inflationary pressures highlighted in your report include additional fuel costs across our fleet of £198,000 and additional energy costs of £63,000. At the moment, those additional energy costs obviously are based on our forecasts figures. Obviously, we wait to see whether there's any announcements from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor in relation to any help with businesses for energy costs. But at the moment, our forecast figures are based on the knowns at this stage. In light of the above costs, we have managed to achieve a pretty much break-even position this financial year because we were prudent enough to put the money at the end of last financial year into our budget management reserve. You'll recall we were coming in under budget last year and we placed a significant amount of that into our budget management reserve. That budget management reserve had a balance of over £900,000 in which we are utilising to offset and mitigate the in-year pressures this year to balance the budget in 22-23. But for 23-24 budget onwards, we won't have that because that is only a one-off protection in terms of using that money this financial year. So the ongoing inflationary pressures experiencing this year will move into the 23-24 budget. And unless we see negative inflation, those will be ongoing costs in the budget that we obviously weren't expecting. We are still awaiting confirmation of the awarded costs in relation to the Yellen planning appeal. So at this stage, we haven't provided for those costs, and obviously that will form part of a separate report to members once those costs are known. Our external borrowing costs at the first quarter was £3 million. And set out in the report are our estimated earmark reserve balances in Appendix B, set out on pages 27 and 28. The capital programme is set out in Appendix D on pages 33 to 36. We've got some movement on the capital programme in quarter one. This is where programme projects are moving and slipping into 23-24, most notably around disabled facility grants. That's where some of those projects are moving in the funding into the next financial year, 23-24. That takes the 22-23 to 24-25 capital programme at just over £27 million now. That's funded through a mixture of capital receipts and borrowing, external grants and contributions, and reserves. Our Treasury Management position is set out in section 4.5 of your report, and then further information on debt management and general debtors is detailed in sections 4.6 and 4.7. And then finally, Chair, at the back of your report in Appendix E are the detailed key performance indicators and service plan actions on pages 37 to 48. That gives you a whistle-stop tour of the quarter one position. Obviously, you're pleased to be in a balanced budget position forecast for this current financial year. But as you're aware, obviously, the ongoing pressures from the inflation impact is really where our concern is moving into 23-24. And Chair, those recommendations are in section 2.1 of your report. I'm happy to take any questions from members.
Thank you, John. And what in-depth report and brilliant as always. And certainly it's nice to see that hope completed and no overdues and no cancel, which is really good. Well done to you and your team. And one thing that's always bothered me, and this might not even be the meeting to ask, I see so many big buildings that have been empty for so long that have been actually made into accommodation for the homeless. Is anything being done about it? Because I've seen some that have been empty for a really, really long time. For example, one down on Roe Quay, that massive building has been empty for so long, and that could house at least 20 homeless people. I just beggars belief sometimes that this goes on, and I'm sure in fact there is something is being done, but how it's allowed that so many buildings, and I've seen some that when I was younger are still empty now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're at the hands, obviously, of the private landlords and owners of those buildings, but the team do engage and do try to work with property owners, because obviously at the end of the day, there's no benefit to the area or property remaining empty. There's no benefit to the owner either, because they're not getting any rent from that property. They're still having to incur property costs in terms of business rates, because they only get 3 months empty property rates initially. So we do try to engage with owners to try and get properties brought back into fruition. Obviously, we're trying ourselves to acquire properties and obviously try to create accommodation. Obviously, part of our ongoing budget pressures have highlighted obviously temporary accommodation costs. That's a significant cost for us. It's also not great for people's well-being to put people into hotel accommodation and B&B, because it's much better to get a final property where they can actually have a better sort of house to live in. So we do want to try and move to acquiring more properties ourselves. We have bought about half a dozen houses. We want to move forwards and try to buy some more properties for temporary accommodation. So whether that be business properties, whether that be individual domestic properties, that's something that the team are obviously looking at. So in a nutshell, for your answer, yes, we are trying to engage with property owners, and we are also trying to buy properties ourselves to bring forward more properties for temporary accommodation.
Lovely, thank you.
How far you've got to run to the job?
That concludes my presentation, Chair. I'm happy to take questions from members.
Very, very quickly, it was mentioned that strategy was also on Monday about streamlining the DFG process by basically taking the first or the only quotation. Please don't do that.
No, I mean, we've got procurement rules we have to go through. We obviously want to continue that. What we need to do is try to streamline that as much as we can. But obviously, we do still want to make sure we get the best contractors and also what's best for the clients. So the process is as slick as it can be. We just need to try and work to get more availability of contractors. That's really what we're looking for. We're not trying to just go out and get the cheapest and quickest quote, because sometimes that's not the best solution for the individual. It's about the throughput of the applications and making sure that that process can be as efficient as possible, not necessarily the procurement of the contractors. It's making sure we can make the end-to-end processes so we can and less painful for people to have to go through.
It was a good question.
A very good question, yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very
Any more
much.
questions?
We appreciate the report.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Apologies for the quickness of it and.
No, don't apologise.
We're still there.
We'll push it to the end again.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, I'm going to move on to your next item, which is around sort of
Item.
the motion from council.
Yes, item 8.
The only thing I was going to add to that is obviously we are working on information on our website around cost of living help and advice. So obviously I know you're going to have a debate about it, but we are also looking to put more information on our website where people can access further information about the cost of living crisis, such as you've got in front of you.
And your, the leader of the council was there, my wife was there.
So there will be lots of information going onto our website around all the help that people can get with their energy efficiency, with their homes, the warm homes discounts, winter fuel payments, etc. So I'll leave that with you, but just wanted to let you know that before you started debating it.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, members.
On page 49, shall we go through it line by line? Well, there's a resolution, see whether we agree with it or like to amend it in any way. So, welcome the imposition of, relatively interesting one. The imposition of the windfall tax on the super profits of the oil and gas companies and question whether this has gone far enough.
It's not, is it relevant to discuss this now, as we've got a new administration now, and she's making an announcement.
She's going to make, yeah, exactly, they're
Yeah,
voting. I just
yeah.
looked at
We
the,
could be answering what she's saying, things.
Yes.
Seems
Yeah.
like,
Councillor, I absolutely agree
Yeah.
with you. We are absolutely in limbo. If we had this next week,
Exactly,
we
yeah,
would be able to answer it. So
Yeah.
we were being a bit,
this is too
shall we just
specific now, isn't
note
it?
it?
yeah.
And that is a non, we just, is a balanced position to be in, and we know the report, and we don't, and we wait for further outcomes from the
Make the
government.
records, I think, yeah,
And I think that answers it.
yeah,
The less we say, the better it is.
yeah.
Just one point, Chairman, B on that one at the bottom. We've got
Oh.
benefits of training for
Yeah.
all councillors to enable signposts of ward constituents appropriately and the type of support available to be considered by the Policy Development Committee. So that's something we do need to look at, whether it's whether you want to wait till you for any more beneficial.
Still wait.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
That is a
Not
very
necessarily,
interesting thing.
well,
Oh, sorry.
I don't totally agree with that, because we can still agree that we
Initiate.
do want
We do
to
want
be
to do
able
it.
to be in
Yeah.
a position where we do have training and we do have the signposting, whatever form that takes. But yes, we still need it
Still
and we
need
want
it.
Oh,
it.
yes, yeah, oh,
And
yes.
then we take on board what
We-
the details are.
Yeah.
Because obviously, we're in the process of developing the training programme for next
Yes.
year as well, so that will be included on the training programme for next year, but obviously in the meantime, we'll probably need to do something for the
Urgent.
members at the
Yes.
time, so it's just to check that we're happy with that.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
It should be to bed in anyway, once you go.
So I got a proposal and a second. Lovely, thank you.
Thank you.
That, you were just going to remind us one or two things, aren't we?
So just the last item on the agenda, item 9,
Yeah,
the work programme, there's nothing attached, just to the committee to note that I need to start formulating that for the forthcoming year, so just to make you aware that I'll be putting that together in discussions with John to make sure we get the finance bits in and any other bits we need to programme in, and then that will come to the next
and it
meeting.
will be on the basis of where we are now.
Yes, everything from the last one,
And that, you know,
and the standard things we have to do, and anything then that gets put in as we go through the process. So that will come to the next meeting. Everybody's happy with that?
and also the NHS.
That would mean I just want to do this item.
Oh,
and then I'll
sorry, you're
mention,
dividing
so-
it down.
So I've been asked to arrange a special meeting to meet with South West Water. they're happy to come along, but they would like some questions prior to the meeting so that they can make sure they can formulate answers properly rather than saying they have to come back to you. So they're looking to come towards the end of October. So they just wanted to seek a steer as to what you would like to get from the meeting, what you want to achieve, so that they can send the right person, and obviously having the questions prior, make sure that they can answer everything properly for you.
So you send us a reminder on that and then we
If
can
I-
reply with it.
If I send out an email to all of
Yeah.
you, detailing what we're looking to do, and then if you can all come back to me with things you'd like to ask, I can then go to my
Yes.
contact at South West Water, and they can then have a look at what the sort of things you're looking at, and then they'll be able to send the right person, and then they'll want the questions 2 weeks before the committee.
That's
So
what I was waiting for.
If we could have that, obviously when we get nearer the time, once the meeting's arranged, we can have all the questions sent to me, and then I can make sure they're sent off in sufficient time for that to be answered. And then if they can do a Q&A at the end of the meeting as well, for any further follow-up questions, then we're happy with that.
Members, we ask these questions, it's infinitely better than someone coming along and giving us a presentation and, sorry for you, really awful, people go through the roof, do you know what I mean? Because there are things that we all very strongly are concerned with, and that's just much more, a better way than having to sit for a period of time listening to a general picture, and there is so much to talk about on this issue. And that's also the advice I've been getting from our colleagues on the council who got in this sort of position.
If we could just take just a quick vote to make sure we're happy with that, and I can obviously put that in place.
Are we all happy with that, members?
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Before we close the meeting, and this is actually related to Jeremy's item, obviously John and do this presentation first. Just a little bit of anecdotal evidence about what is being done to from health and tourism point of view. Visiting the health services in the Southwest have been advertising quite strongly about how to access health services in the Southwest whilst you're on holiday. Things like what constitutes an emergency, what to do if you have mental illness, and the fact that you don't sign up as a temporary patient anymore, you go back to your own doctor, you can arrange for a prescription to be sent to a local pharmacy, using local pharmacies, although that's another issue in this area. And that sort of thing. And I mean, I've seen, admittedly, most of these adverts that I've seen have been on social media, but it was a really good advert that they've been putting out about where to access help.
Can I formally close the meeting now?
Yeah, that's fine. Just go ahead and